Welcome back to Park Ranger Narrative. The Appalachian Trail is supposed to be a place where people go to disappear from noise, cities, and everything artificial. But some people disappear from the trail itself. A snowplow driver once watched something 7 feet tall wait at a hiker crosswalk, press the button, and calmly walk into the woods like it knew the rules better than we did. A teenager saw his brother walking toward him on the trail, while his real brother was still calling from farther up the mountain. A through hiker woke up to find 41 photographs on his phone, all taken while he slept. And in every picture, the same face was closer to his tent. These are not stories about monsters jumping from the trees. They are stories about the moment the woods behave almost normally, but not quite. And if even one of these accounts is true, then the scariest thing about the Appalachian Trail is not how empty it gets at night. It's that sometimes something out there is polite enough to wait for you. The thing that used the crosswalk. Everybody pictures the trail as deep woods. But the AT crosses roads, hundreds of them, and there's a stretch where it walks right through the edge of a sleeping town at 2 a.m. I drove a snowplow on that road for 9 winters. And one February night, my headlights caught something using the hiker crosswalk, waiting for the light, like it had somewhere to be. I want to start with the least woodsy story I have because it's the one nobody expects and the one I can't shake. I'm not a ranger. I ran a plow truck for the county, the graveyard shift, the route that includes the gap where the Appalachian Trail crosses the state road and ducks back into the trees on the far side. There's a marked hiker crossing there, a yellow sign, a push-button light that almost nobody uses because almost nobody is crossing a mountain road on foot at the hours I worked. That February, we'd had a hard freeze, no snow, just black ice and a cold that made the truck's heater feel like a rumor. I came down the long grade toward the crossing around 2, doing maybe 20, salt spinning off the back. My high beam swept the crosswalk as I came around the bend. Something was standing in it, on the white painted lines at the push-button pole, facing the road, waiting. My first read was bear, because that's the honest first read for anything tall and dark on that road. But bears don't stand at a pole. Bears don't stand squared up on 2 legs, shoulders level, the way a person stands when they're waiting to cross. This thing was the height of the sign, call it 7 feet to the top of it, and it was thin in a way a bear is never thin. Long. The proportions were wrong in the specific way that turns your stomach before your brain catches up. The arms came down too far, the head sat too low and forward on the shoulders, and it was still. Not animal still, which always has a little tremor of breath and ear in it. Furniture still. Here's the part the county never let me put in a report. As my truck got close, the thing turned its head, only the head, to track me. And then it reached out one long arm and pressed the crosswalk button. I saw the light change. I saw the walk signal come on, that little white figure, reflected in the ice. And it stepped off the curb and crossed in front of my truck. I stood on the brake. The plow chattered on the ice and I slid most of the way through the crossing, and it was right there in my headlights for a full 2 or 3 seconds. Close enough that I could see there was no face where a face goes, not blank, unfinished, like a sculpture someone had stopped working on. It crossed at a walking pace, unhurried. It reached the far curb where the trail goes back into the woods, and it stepped up onto the treadway and was gone into the dark between the trees. The light cycled back to red. for the thing that had already crossed. I sat in the running truck in the middle of that road for maybe 10 minutes. Then I did the only thing that made sense to a county employee. I drove to the crossing, got out with my flashlight, and looked at the button. It was wet. There was a smear on the steel button plate, dark and slightly thick, at exactly the height that arm had reached. I didn't touch it. I photographed it with the disposable camera I kept in the glove box, and the photo exists, and it shows a handprint that is not a hand too many segments to the fingers and a palm too long. The county replaced that button assembly the next spring for weather damage, I asked. They wouldn't show me the old one. And every winter since, when I'd come down that grade, I'd slow to a crawl at the bend and not to look for it, to give it time to finish crossing before I got there. You learn to be polite to the thing that waits at the light. My brother came back down, nurse. We were teenagers, my brother and me, day hiking a stretch our dad used to take us on. He got maybe 100 feet ahead of me on the switchbacks, around a bend, out of sight, for 90 seconds. Then he came back down the trail toward me, smiling. And then, while that one was still walking toward me, my actual brother called down from up the hill asking what was taking me so long. I was 16. My brother Dell was 19, home from his first year of college, and our dad had just passed that spring, so we went and hiked the loop he used to drag us up every 4th of July. It was a way of being near him, without saying so. That's the only context that matters. We were sad and we were close, and I knew my brother better than I knew anyone alive. The trail switchbacks hard up the first mile, and Dell was faster than me, always was. He pulled ahead going up the steep part, joking over his shoulder, and then the trail bent left around a big rock outcrop, and he went out of my sight. I wasn't worried. You lose sight of people on switchbacks constantly. I kept grinding up the hill. A minute, maybe 90 seconds later, Dell came back around the outcrop, heading down toward me, smiling. I remember being annoyed, like, "Did you forget something? Why are you coming back down?" I said something like, "What?" He didn't answer. He just kept coming down the trail at an easy walk, smiling at me. And something about the smile made my annoyance curdle into a feeling I didn't have a name for yet. It was Dell's smile, his exact face. But it was held too long and too even. The way you hold a smile for a photograph you don't want to be in. And then, from up the hill from above the outcrop, from where Dell had gone, Dell's voice called down. Irritated, normal, alive. "Dude, are you coming or what?" I have tried for years to describe what happens in your body when the brother walking toward you and the brother calling from above you are both your brother. It is not fear first. First, it is a kind of total system error, a whiteout, your mind refusing the input. I stopped walking. The one coming down the trail stopped too, about 30 feet above me, and kept smiling, and tilted its head a little, the way you tilt your head at something you find interesting. I didn't decide to do anything. My body just turned, and I screamed Dell's actual name up the hill, as loud as I have ever made a sound. And I heard him, the real him, say, "What?" in that startled way, and his footsteps came fast back down toward the outcrop. When I looked back at the thing on the trail, it wasn't smiling anymore. The face had gone slack, neutral, done, like a mask when the performance ends. And then it simply walked off the trail sideways, into the laurel, not crashing through it the way a person would, but sliding between the branches without moving them. And the woods took it. Dell came around the outcrop 2 seconds later, real, sweating, annoyed, completely fine. He'd never come back down. He'd been at the overlook the whole time wondering where I was. Here's the proof part, the part that keeps me up. There was a wet stretch of trail right where the thing had stood, a seep crossing the treadway. My prints were in it. Dell's prints going up were in it. There was a third set of prints, barefoot, long, standing where the thing had stood, and then turning toward the laurel, and they only went one direction. They started in the middle of the trail, as if it had stepped into the world right there, fully formed, wearing my brother's face, 90 seconds after he passed out of my sight. I never told Dell what it looked like. I just told him I got scared and we should go. He's 40 now. I still haven't told him it was him. The deer that were facing the wrong way. I've bow hunted these ridges for 30 years. I know how deer stand, how they bed, how they bolt. So when I climbed into my stand before dawn, and the light came up on 9 deer in the clearing below me, every single one of them standing dead still and facing the same direction away from me, into the dark tree line, I knew before I knew, deer don't all look at the same nothing, unless it isn't nothing. I'm a hunter. That's my credential, for whatever it's worth. Not a ranger, not a scientist, just a man who has spent more pre-dawn hours sitting silent in a tree watching animals behave than most people will spend doing anything. And the whole game of bow hunting is reading deer. You live and die by knowing what they're going to do before they do it. After 30 years, you stop thinking about it. You just know the mood of a clearing. That morning the mood was wrong from the second the light touched it. I'd climbed into my stand in full dark, the way you do, and settled in to wait for the gray. When it came, the clearing below me filled in slowly out of the murk, and there were deer in it, a lot of them, 9 that I could now count, which is a big group for that spot. Good, I thought. Then I actually looked. They weren't grazing. They weren't moving at all. 9 deer, does and a couple of young bucks standing rigid heads up, every one of them facing the same way toward the black wall of spruce on the far side of the clearing, away from me. Ears forward. Bodies tense. Weight forward. The posture a deer takes in the half second before it bolts. But they didn't bolt. They held it for minutes. Deer cannot do that. A deer that alarmed flushes within seconds. The tension has to go somewhere. These just stood, locked, pointed at the tree line like 9 compass needles. I have seen deer freeze at a coyote, a bear, a person. They don't freeze like that, and they don't freeze in a group with that kind of unanimity, and they sure as hell don't hold it without one nervous animal breaking and triggering the rest. Whatever was in those spruce had them past the bolt reflex and into something I'd never seen. It had them the way a snake has a bird. I didn't draw my bow, I didn't move at all. I watched the tree line they were watching, and for a long while there was nothing, and then there was a sound, low. Below hearing almost, I felt it in the metal of the stand more than heard it, a long descending tone, like the lowest string on something enormous. The deer's bodies all flinched at the same instant, a single ripple through all 9 of them, perfectly synchronized. And then, from the dark of the spruce, something exhaled. I don't have a better word. A long, slow, wet exhalation far too large, at a volume that meant whatever made it was the size of the trees. The deer didn't run even then. They couldn't. They were held. I have never been so certain that the smartest thing I could do was become furniture. I sat in that stand and did not draw and did not move and barely breathed, while whatever it was stood in the spruce and breathed. And the deer stood in the open and waited to be released or taken. He let them go. The pressure just lifted. I felt it lift. And all 9 deer broke at once and vanished into the woods toward me, past my stand, fleeing the spruce. And I have never seen deer run from anything like they ran from that. They went by under my feet without a glance. I climbed down and walked into that spruce stand afterward because I'm a fool and I had to know. The ground was churned. Something heavy had stood there a long time, pressing prints into the duff that I could lay both my boots inside, side by side, and still have room. I didn't measure them. I drove home. I don't hunt that ridge in the dark anymore. I wait for full light now, like prey. The lookout tower had a light on. I worked a fire lookout for 6 summers, 80 feet of steel, and 1 glass room at the top. Alone. The nearest road an hour's drive away. The tower 2 ridges over had been abandoned for decades. Condemned. No power. No stairs even. One clear night, I looked through my binoculars, and the window at the top of that dead tower was lit, warm and yellow. And there was someone standing in it, looking back at me through their own binoculars. A fire lookout is the most alone a person can be while still having a job. 80 feet up, a little glass cab, a cot, a radio, a map table with the round Osborne sighting device in the center, and 360 degrees of wilderness that is your entire responsibility to watch. You learn the country by heart. You learn the other towers, most of them dead now. The lookout program mostly gone, the old steel skeletons left to rust on their ridges. There was one of those dead towers, 2 ridges over from mine. I could see it clearly in daylight, a gray steel frame against the sky. It had been condemned for decades. The lower stairs had been removed entirely to keep people from climbing it. There was a gap of 20-some feet from the ground to where the staircase started, deliberately cut away. No power had run to it since before I was born. The glass cab at the top was half its panes gone. It was a corpse of a building. One clear, moonless night in my 3rd summer, I was doing a last scan before bed, glassing the horizon out of habit. When my binoculars swept across that dead tower, the cab at the top was lit. Not moonlight, not a reflection, there was no moon. It was warm, interior yellow light, the exact quality of a kerosene lamp, glowing out of a cab that had no glass left in half its frames, and no way for a human being to reach it. I lowered the binoculars and looked with my naked eyes, and yes, there was a small warm point of light on that ridge where there should have been only black. I raised the binoculars again. There was a figure in the lit cab, standing at the rail facing me, and it had something at its face. 2 small circles catching the lamplight, and I understood with a drop in my stomach I can still feel that it was looking back at me through binoculars of its own. We watched each other. I don't know for how long. Long enough that I started to feel the specific horror of being observed by the thing you are observing. The mirror snapping shut. Long enough that I finally did the thing you're trained never to leave undone. I picked up my radio to report a light on the condemned tower, possible trespasser, possible fire risk. The instant I keyed the mic, before I said a word, the light in that tower went out. Not dimmed. Out, like a switch. And in the same moment, my radio, which had been silent, gave one short burst of static. And in the static, just barely, the shape of a voice that wasn't using words. Then nothing. I reported it anyway. The district sent someone to check the tower in daylight because protocol is protocol. They found what everyone knew they'd find. A condemned steel frame, no stairs for the first 20 feet, no lamp, no glass, no sign that anything had been up there in 30 years. Dust undisturbed on the cab floor, they said. No prints. The only thing was that the man who climbed up to check, he brought a ladder for the missing stairs, said the Osborne sighting device in the dead cab, the heavy brass instrument bolted to the center table, was turned, aimed, pointed across the valley on a precise bearing. The bearing was my tower. They radioed me the degrees so I could confirm. I checked it on my own map. The dead tower's sight was aimed at exactly the window I stood in every night, 80 feet up, watching the dark, and apparently being watched right back. I finished the summer. I kept the cab's interior light off after dark from then on. The trail crew that cleared a trail. Nobody built. I ran volunteer trail crews for 11 years. We maintained the AT, and the side trails cut blowdowns, fix water bars, paint blazes. One October, my crew got dispatched to clear a side trail off the maintenance map I'd never heard of. We found it. We cleared it. It was beautiful work, recent, professional, and it led to a place that should not have a trail to it, built by hands that left no record in any agency, club, or county on earth. I want to be specific about how trail maintenance works because the specificity is the horror here. Every official trail in the system is documented. A trail does not exist unless an organization built it, mapped it, assigned it a number, and put it on a maintenance schedule. Volunteer crews like mine are dispatched to specific logged trails. We don't freelance. The paperwork is relentless, and it is the whole point. It's how the system knows a trail is there. That October, our dispatch sheet listed a side trail I'd never maintained, with a trail number I didn't recognize, branching off a section I'd worked for a decade. I figured it was a reroute I'd missed in the updates. We loaded our saws and drove out. We found the junction exactly where the sheet said, and there was a side trail there. And here's the first wrong thing. It was already immaculate. Freshly cleared, the blowdowns bucked and rolled. The corridor brushed back to spec. Water bars cut into the slope at proper intervals, and the blazes blew for a side trail painted fresh and even on the trees at perfect sightline spacing. It was exactly the work my crew would have done. Better, honestly. Cleaner. And recent, the cut ends of the logs were still pale and weeping sap. Nobody had cleared it. I knew every crew in 3 counties. No one had been dispatched here but us, today. The trail was finished before we arrived. We followed it because that was the job, even though the job no longer made sense. It ran maybe 1.5 miles through beautiful, careful trail work. And then it ended. Not petered out, it ended at a clearing with a final blue blaze on the last tree. The way a trail ends when it's brought you to a destination. The destination was a structure, low, made of stacked fieldstone and squared timber, old but in perfect repair, no moss, no rot, the chinking sound, the roof tight. A building maintained as carefully as the trail that led to it. There were no windows. There was a door, plank and iron, shut. And in front of the door, set into the cleared ground, was a doormat woven of grass and root, the kind of thing made by hands with enormous patience and no hurry at all. My crew stopped at the edge of the clearing. Nobody suggested we go to the door. I want to be honest. It wasn't bravery or fear that stopped us. It was manners. The bone-deep sense that we had walked up someone's path to someone's home, and it would be a terrible discourtesy to knock. We stood there a minute. Then, by unspoken agreement, we turned around and walked back out the lovely trail we hadn't built. The proof. I photographed the structure, the trail, the fresh blazes, all of it. I filed the photos with my report and I requested the origin of the dispatch. Who had assigned us that trail number? The answer came back weeks later, and it is the reason I stopped running crews. The trail number on our dispatch sheet did not exist in the system. It never had. No one had generated that work order. The sheet had simply been in the stack that morning, printed on our paper in our format, dispatching us to maintain a trail to a house in the woods that no agency, club, county, or record has ever known about. The blue blazes are still out there. I drove other people to that junction twice more over the years. The side trail is still immaculate. Someone is still maintaining it. We just never built it. And we have never been the ones keeping it clear. The river gave him back wrong. I guided whitewater on a river the trail crosses for 20 years. We lost a client once, a strong swimmer, swept into a sieve, gone under, and the river held him for 3 days the way rivers do. When it finally gave him back downstream, we recovered the body. And then that same evening, while he was zipped in a bag on the bank, we all heard him calling for help from the rapid he'd drowned in. Upstream. 3 days later. I ran a commercial rafting operation on one of the bigger rivers the AT crosses, 2 decades on that water. And I've pulled more people out of it than I like to count. Most lived. The river is mostly forgiving, but it has a few features that aren't, and the worst of them is a sieve. A place where the whole current pours through a gap in submerged boulders that a body can fit into and a body cannot come back out of. We brief every client about it. We point at it from the bank. Do not swim there. We lost a man there anyway, years back. Strong guy, ex-military, good swimmer, did everything right until a flip put him in the wrong current and the sieve took him. We couldn't reach him. The river closed over him and held him the way it does, deep in the rocks where no rope or diver could go. And we waited the awful wait that everyone who works rivers knows, because the river always gives them back eventually, downstream, on its own schedule. It gave him back on the 3rd day, 2 miles down, in a calm eddy, the way it almost always does. We recovered him. We did it right, with respect, and we had him on the bank in a bag, waiting for the county to make the drive out. And the whole crew was sitting there in that flattened, hollow quiet you get after a recovery. That's when we heard him, from upstream, from the sieve. A man's voice clear over the water, calling for help, the specific ragged yell of someone in the river. The sound we are all trained to snap toward. Every head on that bank turned upstream at once, and then we all looked down at the bag, at the man who was zipped inside it, who had been dead 3 days, whose voice we had all heard the day he died, calling the same way from the same rapid. The yell came again. Help, over here! From the sieve that had killed him, 2 miles up, while his body lay at our feet. I'm not a fanciful man. I will give you every rational frame I built, standing on that bank. Sound carries strangely over water and through a gorge. A yell from a different party upstream could have folded down to us. Another swimmer could have genuinely been in trouble. We had to treat it as real regardless. That's the job. So 2 of my guides took a boat and ran upstream to check, hearts in their throats, ready for a live rescue. There was no one. No party upstream for miles, we confirmed later. No swimmer. The sieve was just the sieve, pouring through its rocks, and as the guides sat in the eddy below it, catching their breath, the voice came one more time from inside the rock pile, from down in the sieve where the man had been held for 3 days, calling for help in his exact voice. And then the river just sounded like a river again. Here's the part that isn't sound. The part you can't fold through a gorge. When we finally loaded the body that evening, one of the medics noticed his hands. A drowned man's hands, after 3 days, are a certain way. He wasn't. His hands were locked in the position of someone gripping a rope, both fists closed, thumbs wrapped. The exact grip we teach for holding a throw line, though no rope had reached him, though he'd had nothing to hold, though the river had taken him in seconds. He died reaching for a line that wasn't there, and the river kept his hands that way. And 3 days later it sent his voice back up to the rocks to keep calling for the help that never came. I retired off that river 2 years later. I never briefed the sieve the same way again. Now I tell them, if you go in there and you don't come out, we will hear you for a long, long time. The photographs. My phone took by itself. I'm a through hiker, 5 months Georgia to Maine, alone for most of it. I'm telling you this one because it left evidence I still have on my phone. One night, camped alone, miles from anyone, my phone took 41 photographs by itself while I slept. The timestamps run from midnight to nearly 4 a.m. And in every single frame, getting closer, there is a face at the edge of my tent looking in. A through hike does something to your relationship with solitude. After a few months, you're so used to being alone in the woods that the fear sands off. You sleep like the dead. You stop zipping things. That's the context by Virginia. I was deep in that fearless place, camping wherever, sleeping hard. I camped one night well off the trail in a flat spot I'd found. Nobody around for what I knew was miles, because I'd had the shelter registers and trail talk to track the bubble of hikers, and I was between bubbles, genuinely alone. I ate. I got in my tent. I plugged my phone into my battery pack to charge, set it down by my head, screen off, and I slept. In the morning, my battery pack was drained, and my phone was warm, and the camera roll had 41 new photographs in it. I did not take them. The timestamps run from 12:02 a.m. to 3:51 a.m., spaced irregularly, some a few minutes apart, some half an hour. The phone was set down screen up beside my head, and the photos are all taken from that position, the fabric ceiling of my tent, the dark, the camera firing in the black with no flash, pulling what little it could from the screen glow and the stars through the fly. The first few are almost nothing. Grain. The dim slope of the tent wall. Then, in the fourth photo, there is a pale shape at the very edge of the frame, at the tent door, where the zipper was. By the 10th photo, the shape has resolved into a face. By the 20th, it is unmistakably a face, a human-shaped face, pressed near the mesh of the tent door, looking in. And across the 41 frames, photo by photo, hour by hour, the face gets closer. It is tracking inward, toward the camera, toward where my head was lying. In the last several photos, the face fills the frame. I have looked at these more times than is healthy. It is not a hiker who wandered up, and it is not an animal. It is a face that is almost right and wrong. In the places that matter, the eyes set a little too far apart and open a little too wide. No blink across the frames where the timestamps span minutes. The mouth slightly parted in every shot in the same position, as though it never closed it the entire night. And it was looking at the phone. In the final photographs, the eyes have shifted across the earlier frames. They're aimed past the camera, at me, at where I slept. And in the last few, they have come down and centered on the lens itself. It noticed the phone was awake. It looked into the camera. The very last frame, 3:51 a.m., is just the eye, filling everything, and the timestamp after that is nothing. The phone never fired again. And I woke at 6 to birdsong and a dead battery, and no sign in the dirt outside that anyone had stood there, because of course there wasn't. I have shown these photos to exactly 4 people. 2 told me it was a prank, which is impossible. I was alone. The phone was passcode locked, and no app I have can fire the camera silently 41 times overnight on its own. 1 told me it was a dream double exposed onto a glitch, which isn't a real thing. The 4th, an older hiker I trust, looked through all 41 in silence, handed the phone back, and said only, "It wanted you to know it was patient." Then he asked me to never camp alone off trail again. I finished the hike. I made it to Maine. I have those 41 photographs, and I will not delete them, partly as proof, and partly because deleting them feels like it would make the thing in them think I'd forgotten it. I haven't. It was patient all night. I figure the least I can do is remember the cabin that was closer. Every time I looked, I got lost, properly lost, off trail, in a cold rain, the light going. And then I saw a cabin through the trees, maybe half a mile down slope, with smoke from the chimney salvation. I started toward it, but every time I looked up from my feet, the cabin was closer than my walking could explain. And by the time it was 40 feet away, I understood it had been coming to me as much as I'd been going to it. I'll own my mistake up front because it's the engine of the whole story. I got lost through my own carelessness. Chasing a photograph, I went off trail down a drainage. The weather turned. The rain came in cold and hard. The light started failing, and I realized I had no idea which way the trail was. That's a genuinely dangerous situation. Hypothermia weather, night coming, and I felt the cold animal panic start to climb, which is exactly why the cabin looked like grace. I saw it through the trees downslope. A real cabin, dark logs, a stone chimney, and from the chimney smoke. Wood smoke. The smell of it reaching me a moment later. The most welcoming smell there is to a cold, lost person, maybe half a mile down through the trees. I almost cried with relief. I started down toward it, picking my way over the wet rocks, keeping it in sight as best I could through the timber. I looked down to manage my footing for what felt like 30 seconds. When I looked back up, the cabin was much closer. Not half a mile, a few hundred yards. I'd walked carefully over rough ground. I hadn't covered that distance, not nearly. I told myself I'd misjudged the original distance. Rain and panic mess with depth perception. I kept going. I looked down again, picking through a boulder field. Looked up. The cabin was 100 feet away. I had taken, at most, a dozen steps. I stopped. The rational part of me was throwing every explanation it had: fog distorting distance, exhaustion, the way fear collapses your sense of time and space. But the animal part of me, the old part, had gone very quiet and very cold, because the animal part understood what the rational part wouldn't say, and the cabin was not staying still. The distance it closed was the distance I didn't walk. We were both moving. I'd been doing half the work. And now that it was close, I could see it properly. And everything that had read as salvation through the trees, read as wrong up close. The smoke came from the chimney, but it didn't rise and disperse. Like smoke, it poured down the roof and pooled around the base of the cabin, like something heavier than air. The windows were lit, but the light didn't flicker like fire. It was steady and dim and the wrong color, a sick yellow. And the door was open. It had not been open before. It was open now, facing me, a black rectangle, and the warmth I could feel coming from it did not smell like a hearth. It smelled like breath. I did not go in. This is the story where I act, because staying still or going forward both meant going in, and some final uncorrupted piece of me turned me around and made me walk away, uphill, into the cold rain and the failing light and the genuine danger of the storm, choosing the honest danger over the warm one. And I will tell you the hardest part. Walking away, I could feel it deciding whether to follow. I felt the attention of it on my back like heat. It did not follow. I think because I'd refused the invitation and the rules it ran on required me to come in on my own feet. I spent that night against the lee side of a boulder, soaked, shivering, alive, and found the trail at first light a quarter mile from where I'd been. I have looked at the maps. There is no cabin in that drainage. There is no record of one ever, but I know what wood smoke smells like, and I know it was warm, and I know that if I had walked the last 40 feet it had so carefully closed to, I would not have walked back out. The danger that comes to meet you, dressed as rescue, that's the one that keeps me up. The hiker who asked me to confirm he was real. I met a man at a shelter once who asked me a question no one has ever asked me before or since. We'd talked for an hour, normal trail talk, when he leaned forward and asked, very calmly, if I would do him a favor. Would I touch his arm and tell him whether I could feel it? Because he wasn't sure anymore. And the worst part is, when I did, I wasn't sure either. I was section hiking a few days out, and I stopped at a shelter for the night where one other hiker was already set up, a man maybe in his 50s, gear worn but good, friendly enough. We did the normal thing, cooked, talked, traded where you starteds and where you headeds. He was lucid, pleasant, well-spoken. For about an hour it was the most ordinary trail evening in the world. Then there was a lull, and he looked at me across the shelter in the last of the light, and his face did something not crazy, not threatening, just frightened, a deep, quiet fear, and he asked if he could ask me something strange. Sure, I said. He asked me how long I thought he'd been at the shelter when I arrived. Odd question, but I answered. Looked like you'd just gotten set up. I said, your stuff wasn't unpacked. He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something bad. Then he told me, very steadily, that he didn't think that was true. He thought he'd been at that shelter a lot longer than that. He wasn't sure how long. Days, maybe. He said he kept meaning to leave in the morning, and then it would be evening, and he couldn't account for the in-between. And he'd stopped being able to feel hunger, and he'd stopped needing water. And he had begun to suspect. He said this so calmly it made my skin crawl, that something had happened to him on the trail a while back, and that he had not entirely survived it, and that he was somehow still here anyway, at this shelter, not able to leave. I want to be clear, my read, sitting there, was that this was a man in some kind of dissociative crisis, possibly hypothermic earlier, possibly unwell, and that the responsible thing was to stay calm and kind and keep him talking and get him out to help in the morning. That's the rational frame, and I held on to it. Then he asked the favor. He asked if I would reach over and touch his arm and tell him honestly whether I could feel it, because he could no longer feel himself touch anything, he said, and he needed to know if he was still solid to someone else. I reached over and I put my hand on his forearm. I felt fabric. I felt the shape of an arm under it, the right size, the right place. But I did not feel warmth. and I did not feel the small, constant motion that a living body has: the pulse, the breath sway, the faint life of a person you're touching. It was like gripping a sleeve with a dowel in it. Cool, still. And his face, watching mine, read my face, reading his arm, and whatever he saw there made him close his eyes and nod, like I'd given him an answer he already knew. I told him I felt it fine, that he was solid, that he was just exhausted, and we'd hike out together in the morning. I lied to be kind. I do not regret the lie. In the morning he was gone. His gear was gone with him, every trace. The shelter empty and swept looking. The register I checked, out of an instinct I can't defend, had his name in it, but the date beside it was from the previous season. Months old. I'd watched him cook a meal the night before I'd touched his arm. I hiked out alone, fast. I've thought about him for years. I don't think he was dangerous. I think he was telling me the exact truth. Calmly, the way only someone past fear can, that something takes you on that trail sometimes and doesn't finish the job and leaves you sitting at a shelter, unable to feel your own arm, waiting for a stranger to lie to you kindly so you can finally stop. I hope my lie let him leave. I'll never know. That's the part that keeps me up. The sound that came when we stopped singing. My church youth group hiked a stretch of the trail every summer. 15 kids, 3 adults, lots of noise singing, mostly the way teenagers do. One night around the fire, the singing trailed off into quiet. And in that quiet, from the dark all around the clearing, something started singing it back to us. The same song, in our own voices, from every direction at once. I was one of the adult chaperones, and I'll tell you up front, this happened in front of 18 people, which is the only reason I could stand to tell it, because I'm not the lone witness, because 15 kids and 2 other adults heard it too, and we have never once disagreed about what we heard. We did this trip every summer, a safe, supervised stretch, car camping into a backcountry site. The whole point being to give kids a few days off their phones. They were loud the way good kids are loud, joking, roughhousing and singing, endless, singing the camp songs and the worship songs and the dumb rounds that go on forever. That night we had a big fire and the singing wound down naturally the way it does, the energy draining out of a long day, until the last song trailed off and we all just sat there in the pop and hiss of the fire and the enormous quiet of the woods at night. The quiet lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then the song came back. The same song we just finished, from the dark beyond the firelight, sung in voices that were our voices, the kids' voices, my voice, the other leaders' voices, the specific blend of our group coming out of the black woods all around the clearing from every direction at once, at the exact place in the song where we'd stopped, picking it up and carrying it on. I have never seen people go silent and still so fast. 15 teenagers, instantly frozen. Every face turned toward the dark. One of the girls started to cry without making a sound. The singing went on, our own voices, perfectly matched, swelling around us in a ring, and it was beautiful, and it was the single most horrifying thing I have ever experienced. Because there is nothing in the world more wrong than hearing your own children's voices singing to you out of the dark where your children are not. I did the only thing I could think to do, which was get loud and human and break the spell. I stood up and clapped my hands and said way too loudly, "Okay, everybody in the tents right now, let's go." And the moment I spoke, the moment a real present living voice cut across it, the singing in the dark stopped, mid-word. All at once, from every direction like a switch. We got the kids into the tents. The 3 adults sat up the entire night, back to back to back, facing out, keeping the fire huge. Nothing else happened. No more singing. Just the normal woods and 18 people not sleeping. Here's the evidence. The thing that turns it from a campfire scare into the story I can't explain. One of the kids had been filming the sing-along on her phone for a school project. She'd had it propped on a log, recording the whole evening. And it kept recording through the quiet and through what came after. We watched it the next morning, all of us in daylight, wanting it to be nothing. You can hear our singing on the recording. You can hear it trail off. You can hear the 10 seconds of quiet. And then you can hear the song come back out of the dark, and on the recording, our voices in the clearing are silent, frozen. You can hear the kids' little gasps, and one whispered, "What is that?" while the singing fills in all around from the woods, in those same voices, from a group that is sitting dead silent on the tape. The two don't overlap. We are quiet. The dark is singing in us. That recording exists. The girl's family still has it. We don't watch it anymore. We also don't do that trip anymore. And when those kids, grown now, get together, nobody has to explain why one of us only has to start humming that particular song for the whole room to go cold and quiet and look toward the windows. The man who was wearing my missing father's coat, my father went missing on the trail when I was 12. They never found him. Not a trace, not a boot, nothing. 20 years later, I hiked the stretch where he disappeared to make peace with it. And on that trail, I passed a man coming the other way who was wearing my father's coat. The exact coat, with the exact tear I'd mended myself the summer before he vanished. My dad went out for a 3-day solo hike when I was 12 and never came back. The search was massive and found nothing. No body, no gear, no sign. The cruelest kind of loss, the kind with no period at the end of the sentence. I grew up in that open wound, and at 32, settled, steadier, I decided to hike his stretch myself, alone, as a way of finally closing it. Not looking for anything. Just walking where he'd walked and letting it be over. 3 days in, on a quiet section, I saw a hiker coming toward me northbound to my south. The ordinary trail meeting. As he got closer, I registered his jacket, the way you do, and something in me went cold before I understood why. It was a specific old canvas coat, a particular faded green, with a leather collar, my father's coat. I knew it the way you know your own childhood. I told myself it was a common enough style, that grief was making me see things. And then he got close enough that I saw the repair. The left sleeve near the cuff had a tear that had been mended with the wrong color thread, a clumsy hand stitch, because I had done it myself the summer before he disappeared. 12 years old and proud to fix my dad's coat, and I'd used the only thread we had, which was red on green canvas. And he'd worn it that way and ruffled my hair and called it my masterpiece. That stitch was on this man's sleeve. Red thread, my crooked 12-year-old stitches, on my father's coat, on a stranger walking toward me on the trail where my father vanished 20 years before. I stopped in the middle of the trail. The man stopped too, a few feet away. He was not my father, too young, wrong face, a stranger entirely, maybe 40. He looked at me with mild puzzlement, the way you look at someone blocking the trail. I could not speak. I pointed at his sleeve, at the stitch. He looked down at it, and then he looked back up at me, and his puzzled expression changed, not to recognition, but to a kind of dawning, careful blankness. And he said in a flat and pleasant voice, "He gave it to me. He said you'd know it. He said to tell you he's not cold anymore." I did not ask who. I did not ask where. Every cell in my body understood that I was standing in front of something wearing a stranger's shape in my father's coat, delivering a message, and that the correct and only thing to do was nothing, to not engage, to not follow, to not ask the question that would open a door. We stood there. Then the man stepped politely around me, the way hikers do, and continued south down the trail, and I stood frozen. And when I finally made myself turn to look, the trail behind me was empty. Long, straight, open for 200 yards. Empty. He could not have walked out of sight in the time it took me to turn. But he had. Here's the thing that isn't a coat and isn't a feeling. I filed a report when I got out. I don't fully know why, except that I needed it to be on a piece of paper somewhere. And a sympathetic old ranger pulled my father's original missing persons file to put my statement with it. He read it, and he went quiet, and he showed me the clothing description my mother had given 20 years before, the list of what Dad was wearing when he walked away. The coat wasn't on it. My father, the report said, had left his green canvas coat at home that trip. My mother confirmed it. She'd found it on its hook after he vanished and kept it for years. So whatever was wearing it on the trail that day, with my childhood stitches in the sleeve, was wearing a coat that had never been in those woods at all until something carried it there to find me. The GPS track that drew a door. I'm a data person. I record GPS tracks of every hike, a little breadcrumb line of exactly where I walked logged by satellite. They don't lie. So when I got home from a normal day hike and uploaded my track, and the line showed that for 11 minutes I had walked in a shape no human walks a perfect rectangle, standing upright. A doorway traced in the air on a hillside, I stopped trusting the one tool I'd always trusted most. I'll give you my bias so you can weigh it. I'm an engineer, and I don't like loose ends, and I record GPS tracks of my hikes the way some people keep a journal. The device logs my position every few seconds off the satellite network and stitches it into a line, an exact, time-stamped, independently verified record of precisely where my body went. It is the most trustworthy witness I own. It has no imagination. I did a normal solo day hike, a loop I'd done before, nothing strange that I noticed at the time, and that I noticed is the whole horror, as you'll see. I got home, plugged in the device, uploaded the track to my computer to log it like always. The track was mostly normal, my loop, drawn clean on the map. But there was a section, about a third of the way in, where the line did something impossible. For a span the timestamp showed lasted 11 minutes, my track left the trail and drew a shape. A rectangle, tall and narrow, maybe 7 feet by 3, with corners far too crisp for a human walk and not lying flat on the map the way everything else did. The elevation data showed the rectangle was vertical. My recorded position had traced the outline of a doorway, standing upright on the hillside, gone up one side to 7 feet, across the top, down the other side, and closed the bottom. A door drawn in the air by my own body over 11 minutes I did not remember. I remembered the hike. I remembered that whole section as ordinary walking. I had no memory of stopping, of leaving the trail, of standing up against a hillside and tracing a rectangle in the air for 11 minutes. My body had done it. The satellites had watched it. And my mind had handed me back a seamless memory of a normal walk with the 11 minutes sanded out so cleanly I'd never have known if I didn't log my tracks. I told myself, GPS error, multipath, signal bounce off terrain, a glitch. That's real. It happens. So I checked the raw satellite data, the thing under the pretty line, and the error margins were tight the whole time. Strong lock. Good geometry, no sign of the scatter that causes glitches. The device was certain. According to every satellite overhead, my body stood on that hillside for 11 minutes and carefully, deliberately traced the shape of a door. I went back. Of course I went back. I'm an engineer. I had coordinates. I hiked to the exact spot where the rectangle was logged. It's an unremarkable hillside just off the trail. Leaf litter and a few trees. Nothing there. No rock formation, no clearing. Nothing door-shaped or door-sized. I stood where the track said I'd stood. I felt nothing. No missing time that I could detect. No cold spot, no dread. Just woods. But here's what I cannot put down. When I uploaded that track, the track of me going back to investigate, there was a smaller anomaly at the same spot. Not a full door this time, just a pause. My track showed me standing perfectly still at the base of where the door had been for 14 seconds, which I have no memory of either. And in those 14 seconds, the elevation data shows my position dropped. Not me crouching. The ground reference under my recorded position dropped a meter and came back, as though for 14 seconds. The hillside I was standing on was a meter lower than it is, or I was a meter inside it. I don't hike with the tracker anymore. That's the coward's solution, and I know it. But I'd rather not know where my body goes in the minutes my mind decides to skip. Some doors you're better off not having a map to, the one I helped build the fire. For this is the only one of these where I wasn't afraid, and it's the one that stayed with me the longest. Late, deep in the backcountry, I came on an old woman alone at a cold fire ring, shivering, no gear, no way she should have been there. So I built her a fire. I sat with her. And in the morning I learned she'd been the last thing 4 other lost hikers ever saw, and every one of them had come home. I'll end on the strange one, the one that isn't a scare, because after 12 nights of things that watch and hunt and wear your father's coat, I think you've earned it, and because it's true, and because it complicates everything else I've told you. I was hiking out late, behind schedule, pushing the last miles in the dark with my headlamp deep in a remote section, when I came on a fire ring just off the trail with someone sitting at it. An old woman, tiny, ancient, wrapped in a thin shawl that was nothing against the cold, sitting at a fire ring that held only dead ash, shivering hard. No pack, no gear, no tent, no food, no light, nothing. A frail old woman alone in the deep backcountry at night, miles from any road, with no possible way to have gotten there, and nothing to keep her alive till morning. Every instinct I have as an experienced hiker said this is impossible and therefore wrong. But she looked up at me with watery old eyes, and she was so clearly, simply cold. And the part of me that is a person and not a set of instincts just took over. I asked if she was all right. She said she was only cold, so I built her a fire. I had dry tinder and I got it going fast and fed it up big, and I gave her my spare jacket and my hot water and sat down across the flames from her, and we talked. Or she talked mostly in a soft old voice about the mountains, about how long she'd been coming to them, about how many people she'd seen pass through over the years. I didn't push. The fire warmed her and her shivering eased, and her face in the firelight was kind, deeply kind. And I felt sitting there a peace I have rarely felt anywhere. No fear at all, just the quiet rightness of having helped someone who needed it. I dozed off. I didn't mean to, but the warmth and the long day took me. When I woke at first light, she was gone. No tracks in the dew-wet ground. The fire was cold ash again, as if it had never burned. My spare jacket was folded neatly beside me. My water bottle was full and warm. Though I'd given the water away, I didn't feel afraid. I felt oddly blessed. And I carried that feeling out and mostly kept the story to myself for years. Here's how it complicates everything. Long after, talking with an old-timer who'd done backcountry search work for decades, I described her the fire ring, the shawl, the kindness. He went still. Then he told me he'd heard her described 4 times in his career. Always the same, an old woman at a cold fire, deep in where no one should be. And all 4 times, he said, it was by hikers who'd been lost, truly lost. The kind that don't come back, who had stumbled on her in the night and sat with her and been warmed and woke in the morning to find themselves somehow within sight of the trail again. Found, saved, carried back from wherever they had wandered. I had not been lost that night. I knew exactly where I was. So I don't know why she was there for me or what I helped, or who built whose fire, really. Maybe she's the answer to some of the other stories. The thing that pulls the lost back from the edge. The dark things push them toward. Maybe the woods hold both. All I know is that of everything I've encountered out there, the only one I'd willingly meet again is the one I should have feared the most. I left her a fire, she left me warm water and the rest of my life. I still don't know which of us was the rescue. That's the one that keeps me up, not the fear, the kindness I can't explain. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Park Ranger Narrative. Some places are quiet for a reason.